Hello, fellow Redbirds. Welcome to episode 68 of Bird Fans Forever, the podcast for all things Illinois State sports. Today we got a very special guest, Illinois State's own Dalton Banks. Dalton's been a key player for the Redbirds, earning MVC All-Defensive and All-Academic Team honors. Whether it's his defensive tenacity, leadership on the floor, or clutch performances, Dalton has truly been a cornerstone of this team. We want to welcome Dalton to the podcast. We're pumped to have him here and excited to dive into his journey with the Redbirds.
Welcome to Bird Fans Forever, episode 68 with Dalton Banks, number 3. How you doing, Dalton?
Good. Thanks for having me, guys.
This is awesome. Love watching you play. We're big fans, and so this is going to be exciting. So, Steve had a great question about, we normally ask, how'd you get to ISU? Well, you came in through the transfer portal from a university that we're not going to name, and so Southern. So why don't you talk about what led you to go to the portal and then how you got to ISU?
Yeah, for sure. I had a great 3 years at Southern. Obviously I built some amazing relationships down there, ones that I'll carry for the rest of my life. But after my junior year, I kind of sat back and regrouped, and I just thought it was in my best interest to pursue opportunities elsewhere. And it was one of the hardest decisions that I've ever had to make. I spent 3 weeks really thinking about it. I had multiple meetings with the staff, and I just came to the conclusion that it was something that I needed to do. So obviously I entered the portal, and within it was within seconds, I was on the phone with Coach Peden, and ever since that point, it's just, it was nothing but love, and I quickly came to realize that this was the place that I was meant to be at, and this was the place that I wanted to pursue and try and become the best version of myself that I could become. So definitely grateful for the opportunity that Coach P and staff were able to give to me, and just these last 2 years, it was about me trying to pay them back, because they gave me every opportunity to chase everything that I was looking for.
Were you surprised that a coach from the Missouri Valley, was the first one to pick up the phone and call you? Definitely.
My junior year, we had a really good year. We had some talented players, Marcus Damask, Lance Jones. A lot of guys that could fill it up. Xavier Johnson, who was first team all conference the next year. So we finished well. I think we finished with 23 wins. Advanced to the semis of the MVC tournament, and it's not like I was I didn't do anything. I had a role. I played about 15 minutes a game, but sometimes when you look at guys and people get obsessed with looking at stats, and to be honest with you, my stats weren't insane. They weren't great. So when I initially went into the portal, I definitely thought it was going to be one of those things where maybe I go down a level, or maybe I go back home. But one of the things that stuck out with me when I got on the phone with Coach P is he kind of saw through all of that. He saw what I felt like I saw within myself. And that was part of the reason I was so open to staying in the conference, because I knew there was a level that I hadn't tapped into yet. I knew, I wasn't showing, the ability that I knew that I could get to. And I think Coach P saw that too. When you get into conference season and you're preparing for teams and scouting, you see players all the time. You're trying to put scouting reports together, so you're watching constantly. And that was one of the things that I was impressed with Coach P. Is I think he kind of saw the untapped potential there with me, and kind of how I felt about myself. So it was definitely weird, but again, I felt like I had a lot to prove, and I appreciated Coach P for thinking that I had more in me as well.
And Dalton, I'll tell you, one of the things that impressed me is the fact that even when you're not having a great stat game, right, from a guy who did the same as you did, there's a lot of dirty work that has to be done on the court that doesn't have stats involved, right? Setting screens, getting steals, right? Poking the ball free and somebody else gets the ball, right? That's somebody else's steal, but you created that. Or pinching somebody off on the baseline and then them throwing a bad pass, right? Those are all the things you were incredible at, right? And getting guys around you to play at a higher level. And so, so yeah, very cool. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that I take pride in. It's not the game of basketball is there's so many things that go into that, and it's not just about scoring. So I learned that quick as a freshman. Because everybody comes from, everybody's the guy in high school. Everybody has all these accolades. And, they scored a lot. But you learn quickly the way you get on the court, the way you affect the team is you find ways to impact winning. And that's what I always told myself is, I was going to do the things that might not show up on the box score, but it was going to give us, our chances are going to be increased of winning that basketball game, and that's definitely something I took pride in.
Okay, why don't we pivot for one thing here? Why don't you name who your three roommates are? Because I heard them a little bit in the background. In case one of them comes in on a Thursday night at 10 o'clock when we're recording this, people will know who those individuals are. So who are your roommates?
Yeah, I live with Brandon Lieb, Caden Bozer, and Malachi Poindexter.
Okay. Yeah, so if you hear some screaming, it might be them. They might be watching a game or the draft or something, right? So,
yeah,
all right, Steve, your question.
They're watching the Nuggets Clippers up there.
Hey, the one thing when you announced you're coming, I'll tell you what I was excited about was, you're on ball defense. I knew it was going to come in and you were going to play well, and you were physical, like your upper body, like when you are on the ball, and I know that's a thing they teach at Southern, or it appears to be, yeah. And so when you were coming here, I was just like, yeah, I knew you were going to bring that with you, and I was looking forward to that. But what's some of the things that perhaps that you learned at Southern, on the court that you were able to bring here to ISU and help the team with that?
For sure. I think the one thing I learned right away is if you can't defend, you're not going to play. It's that simple. I came into college. I weighed probably, maybe 180, maybe 175. And I vividly remember some of those early practices. I'm going up against a guy like Lance Jones, who's an inch taller than me, and has 25 pounds on me. And I remember my coaches saying, if you had either better, put 15 pounds on, or you better learn how to take a charge, because I was getting abused and put in the rim left and right. So that was one of the things that I took on right away. I remember that first year and a half. I was every time I stepped in that weight room, it was like we were doing something. It was high energy, because I knew what I had to get to in order to be able to survive in a situation like that. So I was calorie counting, I was going hard in the weight room, and I was able to get my body into a position where I could hang with the physicality of some of the guys in this league, because that's a huge part of defense. A huge part of defense is getting your body right, and then obviously the mentality that comes with it. So obviously I had to get the first step with my actual body comp, and then two, it was just kind of that mindset of every possession, you have to give your all, you have to communicate, you have to fight through fatigue, and you have to be physical with guys.
So when you came over, you had an injury, right? And how long were you hurt at Southern, and did it get diagnosed? And then you had surgery right between your SIU season and your first season at ISU?
Yeah, that was, going through that was definitely one of the most challenging, things I've ever not only gone through in my career, but just in my life in general. So at the beginning of my sophomore year, I vividly remember there was one day we were warming up for practice, and I was doing like one of the Spider-Man stretches, or one of those groin stretches, and I felt a super sharp pain on my abdomen area, my pelvis area, and I kind of just blew it off as maybe some soreness. And then it kind of just progressed and progressed and progressed and got worse over that year. And then by the conference tournament time, we played Drake that year, my sophomore year, and like I could barely even warm up. It took everything I had to even get on the court. I remember waking up in bed and just not even being able to lift my feet. So obviously we went through the whole process of the MRIs, the X-rays, trying to figure out what was going on. And to be honest with you, there just nobody could tell me give me a lot of information. So then I played the whole next year, my junior year, on some pretty high impactful medicine. That helped a little bit, but I was still struggling. That segment from my at the end of my junior year to the next year, I had put on a lot of weight. I wasn't able to work out. I wasn't in great shape. And then obviously that was when I made the decision to enter the portal. And I was very transparent with all the coaches that reached out. I told everybody this was something that I'd been dealing with the last 2 years. I didn't really know what was going on, but I didn't want anybody to take a chance on me without knowing the full picture. But Coach P was very open with that, and that's part of the reason. Again, there's so many things that I'm extremely blessed for that I was given here, but the injury stuff is one of the most important because I got here and once I signed my letter of intent, you're able to share all your medical records. And I remember I shared my stuff with John Munn, and it was like within a day, they were like, hey, you need to get on a plane and go to Philly and get this surgery like now. Like you should have had this 2 years ago. So I guess what had happened is the injury that I actually had, it's not a common practice. And there's really like 2 guys in the entire country that do this surgery. So that's why it wasn't, diagnosed, directly at Southern, just because it's one of those things that's kind of newer and, people are still trying to get the word out. Unfortunately, ISU is a place that has that connection that, was able to get me help. So, I was on the plane within, a couple weeks to Philly, got the surgery done, and, obviously I was able to play that next year out. But again, just sometimes you think about, what could have been, what could have happened, and, I don't know where I would be at, in my life if I wasn't able to have that done. And truthfully, I don't think I would have been able to finish out my career. So,
what is the rehab window? Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So,
what's the rehab window on that?
Yeah, so I had the surgery, and then I was out for about 6 to 7 weeks of just nothing on the floor. Couldn't really do anything. It was all strengthening the core, strengthening the glutes, quads, all that. And then I was able within probably 9 to 10 weeks be able to work back out on the court. So I missed the whole summer going into my first year here. But by the time the season started, I was able to play again.
So by the time the season's, do you feel like you're 100% right when the season started, or were you still kind of?
Yeah, I mean there were definitely some limitations. I wasn't able to. I didn't have the range of motion I probably liked. My conditioning probably wasn't at the level that it needed to be. But again, I just super blessed to have the opportunity to play and be pain-free. Because I think some of the challenges that I dealt with that first year, I would take those over what I had dealt with the past 2 years.
Amen. Amen.
So, yeah, there were definitely some complications that first year, but again, I was in a much better situation that I had been dealing with.
What was it? One of those injuries too? Like, I'm sure it was just frustrating because you couldn't figure it out, or no one else could figure it out too, and you just keep going back, and it's in the back of your mind, like, what's causing this? But is it one of those things too, like, the harder you work, the actually probably the worse you're making it and you're aggravating it?
Yeah, and that was the thing that really sucked, is like the only thing that made me feel better was the medication and rest. And when you're a guy that obviously wants to, compete and grind and get better, it was a recipe for disaster.
Right.
And yeah, I remember those 2 years, obviously living in the gym, wanting to get better, and just, there were days where it was almost a mental challenge because you feel like you're doing something wrong, right? You feel like,
Right.
Maybe you're mentally weak or you're not, doing what you're supposed to be doing, or you feel like you're soft. But in reality, you're dealing with something. But, I also remember trying everything under the book to try and, fix this. I did the ultrasound, I did stretching, I did mobility, I did the dry needling. I probably had 4 or 5 MRIs, X-rays. So I was trying everything to figure it out, but I couldn't get to a position where we could figure out what was going on. But then again, I think that was I think I was destined to come to ISU because there was so much that I was able to benefit from it.
So Dalton, we recently had the 4 incoming freshman recruits, and one thing that happened on every single podcast, whether it was on the air or off the air, they mentioned one Redbird, Mr. Banks, as being a recruiter. Now, I heard Nick Allen's good at it too. They all gave him credit being the first one and corralling them and getting them committed. But they all mentioned you and how you sold the program and the culture and stuff like that. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, I got the chance to obviously hang out with those 3 guys when they came on their official visit, and first of all, great people. I think they have a chance to be special here, not only because of the stuff that they bring on the court, but just the quality of humans they are. When you're a good person, you work hard, you're going to have a chance, and I think all 3 of those guys have that. And when I hung out with them on their visit, truthfully, I was just being myself. I was being real. I tell people all the time, I was given the opportunity to have so much, being involved with this program, being involved with this community, that I feel obligated to share my experiences and make sure people understand that it isn't like this everywhere. You're not going to get an opportunity to play for a university, to play for coaches that care about you, love you. So they can say that I sold them, but I was truthfully just telling the truth. I was sharing my experiences. The coaches do all the X's and O's and figure out who's the best fit, in schemes, whatnot. But in terms of culture, in terms of family, in terms of love, you're not going to find a better spot than this. And then obviously Mason too. Got a chance to talk to him on his visit, and I see Mason as being a guy that it plays similar to me. We actually played for the same AAU program. Obviously I played a couple years back. So we got to relate that way too. But again, with all those guys, it truthfully was just telling the truth, being real, sharing my experiences, sharing how I felt. And again, I think Coach P has done a great job in terms of building this program, that my experiences, how I've felt is enough to get someone else to come. Everybody wants to play for a program where they're loved, play for a program where they're going to be coached in truth and developed as not only a player but a human. So again, there's nothing special that I did. It was just being honest and open about what it really means to be a Redbird.
So did you practice the year before by bringing in your buddy from Eau Claire?
Yeah, so that's actually another cool story. So me and Caden obviously grew up together. We met in I think 6th grade. We went to the same middle school before splitting off and going to separate high schools. And the cool thing about that is we actually never played together growing up. Obviously we'd do the pickup here and there, but we were on different AU teams, different high school teams. So we were always competing against each other. And two talented guys coming from a town that it definitely has athletes and things that come out of that area, but it's not extremely common. To have 2 guys in the same class, be able to play at the Division I level is super cool. So when he entered the transfer portal again, At first it was kind of one of those things where, it's far-fetched, it's your best friend, there's no way. But, I figured, I would at least bring it up to Coach B. The last year we struggled with shooting. We needed a little size, and, that was something that he's gifted at. So I kind of just put it out there, and Coach didn't really say anything for a couple weeks, and then it got towards the end of that cycle, and all of a sudden he was like, "Man, like, we love him. Like, let's get him up to campus." And then within days, things just kind of flew together, and it kind of you saw it coming. It was like, man, like this could end up being a real possibility. And I had to actually recruit him a little harder too, because the schools that it came down to were here in Florida Gulf Coast. So it was like, okay, you can either come play with your best friend for a year, the cold of the Midwest, or you can enjoy the ocean for a year. But I told him, hey man, you can go down south and live that life after this for the rest of your life. But when are you going to have this opportunity again? And he kind of agreed, and ended up here, and the rest is kind of history. But grateful for that as well. Having your best friend here. College athletics is hard no matter where you're at. So having a guy that you can lean on constantly, I was fortunate to room with him as well. It's been awesome, and he's going to be my best friend for the rest of my life. So we'll have some great stories to tell our kids and stuff like that. So
a great big trophy.
Awesome opportunity.
Yeah, and a big trophy. Yeah,
a big trophy.
How about having
For sure.
five guys from Wisconsin on the team? Like, when you guys started coming, I was born in Wisconsin, so like it's something I noticed, and like he's laughing, but like I noticed it. Like, hey, we got someone from Wisconsin coming. Like when you came, and then all of a sudden it's like Johnny committed. He was coming first, right? And then you committed, and so I was like, hey, we got two. All of a sudden Jordan's there. It's three. And then Jack. It was like the basketball mecca.
Underrated hoop in state. I'll defend Wisconsin against anybody till the day I die. I think we got guys that are smart, that compete, that just know how to play the game. And I think again you see guys all across the country performing well from our state. So and I've been in Illinois for the last 5 years. Never thought I would do that when I left, but my heart stays there. So I'll defend our state and for a while.
There you go. Hey, so you enter that last season, right? Your fifth year. It's your last year. Like, what's your approach? What are you thinking as you're going into the season, and like what do you want to bring to the team, and what do you want your mark to be?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, the number one goal always for my college career and for the rest of my basketball career is to win. So that's always been number one. But for me personally, I was chasing getting to that version of me that I was proud of. I obviously had some setback. I came into college with high expectations. I played a lot my freshman year, had some success. I had an idea of what I felt I could be as a player, what my potential was, and then life happens. You battle some adversity, you have some setbacks, and things don't necessarily pan out to what you expect. But having this new opportunity, and then obviously the last run with my senior year here, my goal was always to chase that version of me that I knew I could be, to get to the level and play at the level that I knew that I could get to. And even within the year, things didn't go perfect. There were times that I struggled. There were times that I wasn't playing as well as I know that I needed to for our team, as well as that I know I could. But I did feel like towards that end of the season, I got to that level. I was playing consistently at the level that I felt like I could always get to, and that was what I was extremely proud of myself for. Again, throughout these 4 years, battling the things that you go through, but having the resiliency to step up and attack the next day. And that's why I got so emotional on my senior night, is back at all that stuff, and you're just proud, man. You're proud of the stuff you go through, and that was a super cool moment for me. And then, obviously trying to be a role model for these young guys. That was something that I always desired and chased. Coming into college, is to be a mentor, to be a leader. When I was at Southern, I didn't necessarily have that. We had a bunch of guys that were either a year above me or not in my position, that were much older. So a lot of it was competition. I would say my biggest mentor, in college, was my big man JD Mula, who was a couple years older than me, and then my coach. So then, when you kind of go into this new role at ISU, and all of a sudden you're in a position where you've got guys that you can mentor, I definitely took that to heart. I poured into the guys as much as I could, tried to give them, the best advice that I could, and, really try and take them under my wing. And, all their successes and the stuff that's coming from them will be on their own, but, I would love to think that I definitely had a little part in, trying to develop those guys as, as people and as players.
I mean, the one thing I noticed, like, as the season progressed, and I know you were named captain, so you're probably already a leader in the locker room and stuff like that, but, like, to me, you could see it on the court, like the difference. I don't know if you felt it or something like that, but I just thought your leadership, like, it grew through the thing, and, like, halfway through, like, maybe the third way through the Missouri Valley, I mean, I don't know if there was a game or a moment or something like that, but it just seemed like it started oozing out. And then you got really, really consistent, in my opinion. And I mean, you had some good games your junior year. Like, I remember, like, I think it was UIC or something like that. We were at that game at UIC. I mean, you had, like, incredible, like, half or something like that. It was just, like, unbelievable. But I thought you were just so consistent. I mean, I don't know if you know it, but you scored in double digits 8 out of your last 9 games. And I mean, you were just commanding the floor. And to me, it was a different level from even the beginning of the season, the senior year, and the end.
Yeah, again, I think, that was part of continuing to chase that player, that I always knew that I could be. And, the skill, the talent, that's the athleticism, that was never a question for me. It was more, the consistency, the mindset, the confidence, the aggression. And I feel like those are the things that I started to unlock a little bit more as the season went on, is just, being aggressive, finding my spots, making plays for others, and then again, doing it for 40 minutes, day in and day out. And again, I think that was the last piece for me that was missing. And that's kind of one of the things that, I figured out. I wish I, maybe could have figured it out a little earlier, but again, it felt good to feel good about myself and feel good about the way, things ended for me. And then, obviously continuing to try and establish a leadership role and continue to help these guys develop and, hopefully learn lessons that will continue to allow them to grow and continue to allow them to elevate this program.
Yep. Well, first of all, Dalton, you found it. There's a lot of people that don't find it, okay?
Yeah.
And you overcame that injury, so, kudos to you. But speaking about finding your places, one place you found yourself a lot was for how tall are you? 6'1", 6'2", 6'2"? But be honest now, okay? It doesn't matter.
6'2", but I'm probably closer to 6 feet if we're being completely honest.
All right.
So you say the program lies? Is that what you're saying?
Maybe fibbed a little bit.
But the one thing, I don't know who taught you this, and I don't know if it was Pemberton or whoever, but, like, you find yourself on the block, and you know how to use that upper body and create space, no matter who's down there with you. Which talk a little about that. Like, who taught you the post game? Were, like, you in middle school, were like you the post guy, and then it's something you knew all along?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So actually, funny enough, I have an uncle that was a really talented basketball player. His name's George Banks. He was drafted in the '98 draft in the second round by the Heat. And he was a big 6'8", post player. Kind of reminded me of like a Kevin Garnett. So when I was younger, He lives on the West Coast, so I never got to see him a whole lot. But I remember when I was younger, probably around like middle school, 6th, 7th grade, he came up for a while, and we were working out all the time. And I'm a guard. At that time I was probably 5'6", 5'7", but he's old school. And when we were working out, it was all post work. It was all on the block, post moves, footwork, stuff like that. So. I kind of developed those skills from him, and obviously being a strong physical guard, that those are skills that can translate. And then when I actually got to college, obviously you guys probably know Marcus Damask. I played with him for a couple of years, and he really dominated with the booty ball, and that was something that I kind of picked up on too. Is I am a strong physical guard that has pretty decent height for the one position at this level. So this last year, it was kind of one of those things that I started doing a little bit in practice, and it was super effective. And again, it was one of those things that just kind of translated on the court, and I found myself having a lot of success with it, whether it was scoring at the rim or drawing defenses and making plays for others. But then again, that's another credit to the coaching staff, is allowing me to do something like that, because posting up your point guard may seem a little unconventional, but it was really effective for us at times. And again, it was one of those things that they allowed me to do.
I don't remember that at Southern you doing that much at all. Posting, no. Yeah.
All right, Dalton. My parents made it to a lot of games. I said we met them a couple times, and all of a sudden you're at Illinois State, which is 4 hours down. That had to make them a little happy just in the drive alone, right? I mean, 8 hour versus a 4 hour drive is huge. You also off air talked about the Butler game. So why don't you tell us about the Butler game and your parents being at the games?
Yeah, looking back these 5 years, my parents have been everything to me. They've made it to pretty much every event that they could, whether it was at Southern, 9 hours away, or obviously Illinois State, 4 hours away. So, super grateful for their support. And, I know if they had the opportunity to do it again, they would in a heartbeat, because obviously they have a lot of love for me, and family's everything to us. But yeah, one of my favorite memories was from my freshman year, during the COVID season. We got scheduled to play Butler, and it was I don't know if whoever's watching remembers how that kind of worked that year, but you could, if teams tested positive, you could have a game canceled and you'd have to pick up another one. So that was one of those things that happened to us. We hadn't originally planned to play Butler that year, but some COVID stuff went on, and we got them on the schedule, and within 2 days we were headed over there. And I remember that was kind of my first big time experience, playing at a high level school. You're a freshman, and you get a chance to go play a Big East team, and then again in a historic place like Hinkle. It was a super cool opportunity. And I remember calling my parents up and, just telling them about it, not thinking, they would be there by any means. And, I remember warming up for the game and looking up, and all of a sudden there my dad is. At the drop of a hand, he drove down, and I don't know how far Indy was from Eau Claire, but it's got to be around 6-7 hours. So to see him in the stands, that was super cool. Then we ended up, winning that game, so another, special memory. And then obviously he gets on the road and drives through the night and is back at work the next day with no sleep. And,
wow.
There's just so many examples of them doing that throughout my career. So yeah, they're my biggest supporters, and I couldn't have done these last 5 years without them.
Then you were talking about Kansas, or the Missouri State game. I want to call it Southwest Missouri. Sorry, old school, but the Missouri State. You have family from Kansas City, and you had a big turnout for that. Talk about that.
Yeah, I've been blessed to have so many pockets of family that have been able to come and watch me over the years. And my cousins, they live in Kansas City. So they were able to, come to the Missouri State games for most of my career, and bring all the little ones out, and they had signs this year, and it was just such a cool deal. But again, family's such a big part of my life, and I've been blessed to have different pockets that have been so supportive over these 5 years. And again, it means everything to me when I can look up and see someone that's super close to me support me and cheer me on.
So is it true there was more Dalton Bank fans than Missouri State fans at that game? It looked like it.
Yeah, I don't want to throw too much shade at Missouri State, but the Banks family did show up pretty deep for that game. They made a difference for sure.
It was a close game too, so we needed all the help we could get.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
All right, Dalton, let's talk about it. We're going to go into the CBI. So you take a heartbreaking loss in the Valley Tournament. Start walking us through, when did you guys find out about possibly doing the CBI? Did Coach talk about it at all, right? So you get the heartbreaking loss to Drake. They suck. Sorry, I'm a Redbird through and through. Yeah. So
Belmont, John.
Oh, Belmont. I said Drake. Well, yeah. Drake sucks too. But Belmont, thank you. So talk about the whole process of leading up going to the CBI and how you found out about it and what they were talking about and those kind of things.
Yeah, we kind of knew right away. I remember being in the locker room and, waiting for Coach to kind of come in and, talk to us after the game. And he came in and he wasn't as emotional as I kind of thought he would be. So that's kind of when I knew right away that, maybe something was going on. And then I remember we got to the hotel, and he brought it up to the team that it was something that we were considering, and that obviously it was something that we wouldn't do unless we went all in. So we had to get the approval of all the guys, and all the guys they wanted to compete, they wanted to play, they wanted to get that bad taste out of our mouths. So we decided within the next couple of days after the Valley tournament that we were going to go and compete in the CBI. So that decision was made pretty fast, and it was pretty unanimous between the guys.
Awesome. All right. So now you're prepping for your first game, right? So take us through being prepped. You're flying down there. How did you guys feel? What was the locker room like? Those kind of things.
Yeah, it was truly such a great experience for us. We took probably a week off after the Valley tournament before we came back to campus and started practicing again. And nothing changed from in terms of our mindset. We were preparing for these games like we prepared for every other game. The rest of the season. Some of our best practices came at those last couple weeks of getting ready for that. So then obviously we flew down to Orlando, got to spend some great quality time together. Went and watched a Magic game. So just a lot of time to really bond. And continue to come closer, because when you're in it, with guys that you love, you don't want your season to end.
Do not want it to end. Exactly.
As far as possible, and I vividly remember, that whole week, just really being where my feet were and really just cherishing the guys and cherishing the time that I had with the guys, and just really enjoying every single practice, every single team meal, every single walkthrough. And again, just being grateful for it all.
Okay, we start off with Presbyterian. Kind of walk us through how the game flowed, how it felt to you, those kind of things. Things you kind of remember from that game.
We were ready. We were ready to play. But one thing I do remember for that was getting my game win back a little bit. You can condition all you want, but once you step on that floor for a real 40-minute game, that's a different type of conditioning. So I remember fighting through a little bit of fatigue that game, but in terms of the X's and O's, we were ready. I think the seniors really stepped up too. I thought Malachi, Jordan, Caden, they all had great games. They were ready to play. So yeah, that was kind of one of those things that we got over the hump of that first one, and I knew that it was probably going to be tough to beat us.
Okay, so we're going in then the next game. UIW, right? That's always a tough one to say.
Incarnate Ward.
Yeah. You had little time to prepare. What was the game plan for that one?
Yeah, that was probably my favorite game of the tournament for sure. Just because it was a testament to our resiliency that we had built throughout the whole season. I don't know the exact statistics on it, whatever, but we lost so many heartbreakers this year where it was just one or two possessions that we just couldn't get it over the hump and finish. And that became kind of the stereotype for our team, is that we were a team that couldn't get over that hump and finish games and close out games. So I remember being in that second game, late in the second half, and all of a sudden they're on a little bit of a run, and I don't know what they were up, but they were up on us, and I kind of looked between the huddle, and nobody was phased. We were all about the next play. We were all about executing, and we made enough plays to push ourselves over the top and end up winning that game. And I just remember feeling really proud of our guys, because it was the same situation that we had been in all year long, but we dominated. We dominated those last 4 minutes, and we were able to come out with a win.
You know who played really well those first two games was Thate Pence. But I mean, man, he really he had two really good games, and there was a moment, like, I don't know if you remember this, where the shot clock was running down, and I mean, he was like sitting like far out, took a really long shot, nailed a three, and he hit like back-to-back threes. Do you remember that?
Yeah, for sure. Super proud of that kid, man. He's a guy that has worked super hard. He's super talented. He's athletic freak. Has good size to him, and he was super highly recruited coming into college, and things didn't translate right away necessarily, but his work ethic and his passion for the game, it's unmatched. And to see him kind of come into his own a little bit during the CBI, like, it was super cool to see, and I'm ready to see how it translates into next year, because that's a guy that there's a lot there, and he deserves to have the type of season that he wants and that he's going to get.
So you beat Incarnate Word, but you got to grind that one out, right? Like you said, you were down a little bit, and you had to get over the hump of and closing a game. It's as much learning and feeling how to get that done as anything. So you do that. You got a little turnaround at Cleveland State. What's the game plan for Cleveland State, and what's the kind of mood among the team, and kind of walk us through that going into Cleveland State?
Yeah, it was definitely a surreal feeling. It's a crazy feeling knowing that you're going to play in your last game no matter what happens. And I remember being in the locker room with the guys and just thinking to myself, we have to end this on a win. I don't want to walk out of here with an L, and end my career that way. I just had so much love for everybody, that I got to go to war with every day, that we needed to end it, the right way. And I think that feeling, that mindset kind of translated on the court. I thought we, executed what we were supposed to do. Obviously you have a guy like Caden Bozer who has a career night and, really propels us to a win. But what a special way to, end a college career. I thought about, truly how many people out there can say that they ended their career, on a win.
Very few.
So, yeah, it was a super cool opportunity for us. Obviously we got to celebrate together in Florida, but just super cool and super grateful for the opportunity, because I do think, one, it bonded us, it allowed us to grow together, to come closer, and then again, what a way to set up for the future. You win the CBI, you return all of your guys, and again, it was something that I was super proud of, because it felt like I left the jersey in a better spot. And now this thing is ready to set on fire and do much bigger and better things. And again, I can't wait to watch and know that I was a part of that.
That is awesome. All right, so you win it. You guys are done with all the celebration. Do you guys go back in and then shower and head to the hotel? And do the coaches cater in food at least, or do you get McDonald's? How's it going? Because, I mean, you know how it is, right? You run into the plane, and they're going to hand you whatever you're going to get. You're not running to the plane. You guys get to stay the night in the hotel, right?
Yeah, we had quite the celebration in the locker room. Spent a lot of time in there, just hugging, talking everything out, and then we walked back to the hotel, and we had a big team dinner where we all just kind of hung out and shared laughs, shared stories. And then, that was pretty much it. We were kind of on our own then, and then, we packed up and headed out the next day. So, again, just a super cool opportunity, and definitely a blessing for all of us to take part in that.
Did you walk up to Thate and say, if you had gone to Florida Gulf Coast, you would have been knocked out in the semifinals of the CBI?
Yeah, we definitely joked about that a little bit, but then man, what a way for him to cap off his career against actually one of the assistant coaches that coached him at UMKC his freshman and sophomore year. So
really,
really
pay back for that too. But yeah,
wow.
But yeah, it was again just. It's storybook. I'm a little, at loss for words. I still just smile every time I think about it, but definitely some core memories for me and some stuff that I know that I will never forget with a bunch of guys that I care, pretty deeply about. Yeah, just want to say thank you to my parents, the coaches, everybody that I was able to interact with, here at Illinois State, the fans. I hope you guys truly understand, what these last 2 years meant to me. I kind of talked about it a little bit in my senior speech, but, I definitely came, here 2 years ago, not in a great spot, mentally, physically. I look back, after, these 2 seasons, and, I come out a different person, a healed person, a person, that's proud of, what they were able to accomplish, proud of, what they were able to, contribute to this university. And again, just super grateful for all the opportunities that this university has given me. And I'll spend the rest of my life, trying to pay that back. But just grateful in general that, I have a place to call home for the rest of my life. I can't wait to, follow Redbird basketball and, see the success that's coming and, be a part of that and root, on the guys and, everything that is coming for them. But again, super grateful. And, I will always be, a Redbird for life.
That is awesome. Thank you, Dalton. This has been great. Thank you for coming on the podcast. This is Bird Fans Forever, episode 68, with Dalton Banks, CBI Champion. Yes, hit it, Jon. Let's get some clapping.